Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Gink YouTube channel. In today's video, we're delving into a crucial topic, systemic bias and its profound connection to racism. We'll explore what systemic bias is, how it manifests, and the impact it has on marginalized communities, particularly in the context of racism. Understanding systemic bias. Before we dive into the connection with racism, let's define systemic bias. Systemic bias refers to the inherent, often unconscious, discrimination present in societal systems and institutions. It can manifest in policies, practices, and behaviors that unintentionally disadvantage certain groups while favoring others. Systemic bias versus individual bias. It's important to distinguish systemic bias from individual bias. While individual bias involves personal prejudices, systemic bias operates at a larger scale within structures like government, education, criminal justice, and employment systems. Understanding this difference is crucial to addressing and dismantling systemic issues. The link between systemic bias and racism. Now, let's explore how systemic bias is intricately linked to racism. Systemic bias often perpetuates and reinforces racial disparities, creating unequal opportunities and outcomes for different racial groups. This can be seen in government, education, employment, healthcare, and various other facets of society. Historical context. To comprehend systemic bias fully, we must consider its historical roots. Many societal structures were established during times of overt racism and discrimination, contributing to the perpetuation of bias. While overt racism may have diminished, its echoes linger in systemic structures. Examples of systemic bias. Let's examine some real-world examples. From racial profiling in law enforcement to disparities in healthcare access and outcomes, systemic bias continues to shape the experiences of racial minorities. Understanding these examples is crucial to dismantling the systems that perpetuate inequality. Impact on marginalized communities. The impact of systemic bias on marginalized communities is profound. It exacerbates existing inequalities, limiting opportunities, and reinforcing harmful stereotypes. This perpetuates a cycle of disadvantage that can be challenging to break. Addressing systemic bias. Addressing systemic bias requires a multifaceted approach. It involves acknowledging its existence, fostering inclusivity, and actively working to dismantle discriminatory policies and practices. This requires collaboration from individuals, communities, and institutions.